we're always in learning mode. And if we just talk about that, let's say during an interview, just to acknowledge, look, I don't know everything, but I'm really good at learning. And I can learn very quickly given the right circumstances. I think people would like that, to hear that. And I think that those are probably the two biggest ones. And I can't, okay, is the other one. I can't do that. And so I know for myself, I am of an age where computers were not present during my childhood. Okay, we couldn't even imagine a life with computers. Or we would talk about the fact that at some point you'll be able to do exactly what we're doing in this moment, talking to each other in real time on opposite sides of the planet.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Melting Pot. I want to add here that in a world where is very rarely linear, my guest today, David Petrovay, is a guiding light for those navigating change and seeking meaningful work. He's had 20 years of experience in career counseling and coaching, but before he did that, he spent 34 years working in schools for the blind. And then he himself made this very bold and dramatic career change. And not only that, David is also a published author of 3 books. So thank you so much for joining me on this show today, David.
It is my pleasure, Payal.
David, can we kickstart the conversation, just getting an understanding of your background a little bit?
My background is rather inconsequential, I would suppose. I grew up back east in the United States in a city called Pittsburgh. And the time when I was growing up, it was known for steel mills. And so we were talking about careers and career paths for people. The natural career path for me back then would have been to finish high school and go to work in one of the steel mills. That was something that my relatives did. And so that wouldn't have been unusual for me to do that. However, that was not the life that I wanted to live, Payal. So I went on to the university, earned 2 degrees. One of them was in psychology, and the second one was in the education of the blind. Now, I will tell you, that was never anything that I planned from childhood. It was rather serendipitous because when I was graduating, the choices for me were you can go back to school or you can go to Vietnam because it was in the during the Vietnam War. And
Oh, okay. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
okay. And so I thought, oh, Vietnam doesn't sound like it's the greatest option. And just then, in terms of serendipity, I received a letter from the university saying, we're offering fellowships in special education. We need teachers. So I thought, okay, I'll look into it. And I did. And I was accepted into the program for teaching the blind. I interviewed with just about every disability there was, and that was the very last one. And I said, I could do that. So I did my master's degree in, I believe it was 8 months, an entire master's degree.
Oh, wow.
That was how badly they needed teachers. They just pushed us through. And so I found myself in the fall working at the first school for the blind in Pittsburgh. I was there for 7 years, then moved to Arizona. And I was there for 22 years in a variety of roles. And then finally, I went on to the state of California and worked at that school for the blind for the 5 years that I ended my career. And so two of those resulted in being able to retire. I had that many years in. So that gave me a stable source of income once I left that. And then you were saying about making that leap of faith. Oh, it definitely was a leap of faith. I was at the point where I didn't think that I could show up for work one more day. I was so burned out because in one of my jobs, they had me, I would start at 6 in the morning and I would work till 9 at night in 3 different roles that they had me assigned to. And that's started that whole mechanism of, I don't know how much more I can do this. And so in the meantime, I had earned another master's degree in counseling from the University of Arizona and then proceeded to get a PhD from there. So at this point,
And what was the thesis for your PhD?
it went back to what started me in this whole journey, which was why would people ever begin to think about working with the blind? And
David, sorry, I've been listening
good.
to you, and it's sometimes, like you mentioned, that, the connections are sometimes just so unexpected. And it's interesting that I'm having this conversation with you because I have been associated, not any longer, but I was associated with the blind for a fair amount of time. I would do in my spare time, I would go and not teach, but read to the blind at university level. And then there was this recording studio, and I am also a professional voice talent. And so I recorded audio books for the blind. And it's interesting that we're talking about you having spent a career and a lifetime virtually with the blind. So, yes, I
Yes.
just wanted to add that in to the
Of
conversation.
course, yes, and I know all about recording for the blind and the importance of people who are blind having that available to them. And of course, people would say one of the things that we know about blindness is they have this automatic compensation where they are the greatest listeners because they've lost their sight. And I said, no, they have to learn how to do that. That just does not come, as
Exactly.
you would know, you
Yeah,
would know.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. So do go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, so at that point, after 34 years, Pale, I said, you know what? There's more to life. I'm young enough. I think was at that point 55 when I decided that I was going to make that change. So for your listeners, it's never too late, okay? Because oftentimes they'll give themselves the message, oh, I'm too old to make a change. No, that's only in your head that you're too old. So anyway, I thought, oh, I'll turn in my letter of resignation and I won't have any trouble getting another position because I have a PhD and they'll be so thrilled to hire me. Almost 2 years later, looking for work, I thought, oh, that wasn't as easy as I thought. But in the meantime, what I was able to do was some volunteer work at a local job employment agency. And I volunteered to do career counseling with individuals just to see if this was an area that was truly of interest to me. And I loved it. And so that's what set the groundwork for what was to come later. I worked for two agencies short term, and then I decided it's time for me to bite the bullet and go into business for myself. I had no experience in how to start a business, much less run one, but I learned. I thought, no, I'm intelligent enough. I can learn how to do this. And so that was back in December of 2008 that I made that decision. And I never regret it. Was it easy at the beginning? No. There were months, Pale, where I had one client, but I thought, no, I'm committed to this and
Yeah.
I'm going to stick with it until I can grow this business. And then, of course, as you mentioned, it grew from being a counselor to writing books and then being a speaker. And where most of my speaking engagements are on podcasts. I love doing podcasts. And all you have to do is be able to talk.
Yeah, exactly. And
That's
then it's more one on one, and it's more sharing your journey, your experiences. Because when you're talking to, it's great to be a speaker in front of a huge audience, but there's that rest, the engagement is not, it's not a one-on-one, so there's restlessness. Some people may be listening, others may just be doing their own thing or being on their phone. So yeah, no, podcast I think is a great, that's why I am a podcaster, because I really believe in the medium of it being so impactful, and in terms of communication, in terms of reaching out to a larger audience. Because also with a podcast, someone can stop listening to the conversation if they get engaged doing something else, but then they can come back to it. because it's there, it's archived. Unlike when you're a speaker in front of a large live audience, there's no they if they've missed something, they've missed it.
Right,
So
exactly.
yeah, so no, that's I'm happy that you say that you
Oh, and
love being.
the other exciting piece of that, Payal, is that you're on the other side of the world from me.
Yes.
Right now, it's tomorrow for you. Of course, people who are listening to this won't have that same experience depending on what time they tune into it. But I thought I can be on a podcast with someone on the other side of the world, and I have been. I have been on podcasts in the Netherlands and England and you name it, and yourself. There was another gentleman, I think he was in Indonesia,
Okay.
and your listeners can't tell that we're all these thousands of miles away because we're face to face right
Yeah,
now.
exactly. Exactly. Okay, so let's come back to the shift in your career and how you took on counseling, career counseling, really.
Yes.
So, what are some of the biggest mindset shifts that people need to embrace when they're navigating a career transition? What is the kind of advice that you give people?
Part of it is listening to their stories, Payal, and in their stories, they will tell me what their mindset is. And oftentimes it's based on what we refer to as limiting beliefs. So we talked earlier about, oh, I'm too old to make a change at this point. That's a major mind shift for people. And they will hold themselves back if they truly believe that. And I've seen people who try to make themselves look younger. So, especially with men, they're naturally gray. And what do? They dye their hair jet black to make themselves look younger. And it actually creates a disconnect because you'll look at them visually and say, there's no way that would occur naturally. So, what are they trying to accomplish here? And it can actually work against them because that will get in the way of the person who's interviewing them actually paying attention because they're going to be so distracted by how the
Distracted.
person, yes, by
Perfect. Yeah.
how that person looks. And so I think that's one of the big ones. The other one is this whole thing about imposter syndrome. If people really knew how little I knew, then they would never keep me on this job. And the bottom line is no one knows everything about what they do. We're always in learning mode. And if we just talk about that, let's say during an interview, just to acknowledge, look, I don't know everything, but I'm really good at learning. And I can learn very quickly given the right circumstances. I think people would like that, to hear that. And I think that those are probably the two biggest ones. And I can't, okay, is the other one. I can't do that. And so I know for myself, I am of an age where computers were not present during my childhood. Okay. We couldn't even imagine a life with computers. Or we would talk about the fact that at some point you'll be able to do exactly what we're doing in this moment, talking each to each other in real time on opposite sides of the planet. That was beyond our comprehension. That idea of I could never learn that. I can't learn that. I will tell you, I'm challenged by some of the things I have to learn. But if it's important to me, I learn it. I remember the first time I ever sat down at a computer and someone said, look, we're just going to start out with you playing one of these ancient video games just to get used to working the mouse. And that got me started. When I first bought my own computer, I had to talk to someone who was in technical support because I didn't understand something. And she was talking about the modem. And she says, now the first thing you have to do is, and then she referred to the modem, and I said, stop right there. What's a modem? I thought, oh, she said, I've got my work cut out for me here. But I've learned all of those since then. And so I think it's just the idea that you have to think beyond your limitations and say, I can learn this. Now, there are going to be other things, no matter how hard you try, you're just never going to be proficient with it. And that's okay too. That's why we hire other people.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. You mentioned that life is what we make it. So, how can someone actively shape their career instead of just reacting to opportunities?
In a way, I think sometimes reacting to opportunities can be a good way to shape your career because you never know what that opportunity might bring you. Now, in terms of shaping it, I just read recently where someone wrote, and again, they're entitled to their opinion, Payal, which is don't go after your passion. That's ridiculous. That's a pipe dream to pursue your passion. Just get a job. And then I'm thinking, I wonder if that's this person's approach to life and how happy they are not pursuing their passion, or maybe they are and don't even realize that's what they're doing. And so to them, maybe that's not so important, but they're doing it. So I think that the idea is, what is your passion? I think that's the first thing that people need to find out. And to me, your passion is something that you do where it just feels effortless. They'll refer to it as you're in the flow. And it's something that you could just spend hours doing and you just get lost in time. And people will say, I can't believe they pay me to do this because I do it for nothing. I enjoy it so much. So I think that really would be indicative of someone's passion. I used to always say to people, too, if you're not sure what your passion might be, go back to your childhood and look at what you enjoyed doing as a child in terms of play. What was it that you played with that just was wonderful for you, where those hours passed quickly? And I know I was just talking to someone about what that was for me. And unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to pursue it just because of the time that I grew up in. And probably if I had, I'd probably be a mechanical engineer right now or an architect. Very different from the work I do now because for hours I would play with one toy was called an erector set. And I would play with that and build things. And I loved the idea that I could put things together and they would move. And if it was architecture, I loved skyscrapers. I loved building skyscrapers. But again, when I went to school, that was not encouraged. They encouraged the three R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then somehow you were supposed to figure out from that how that would apply to work that you could do as an adult. Somehow that was always the missing piece for me. So when I was working in the schools for the blind, one of the positions I had was as a career counselor. And so what I did for those students, actually these were ninth graders, was to give them a menu of all the possibilities under like 15 different job types. So it might have been skilled labor, unskilled labor, office work. So I would put together a module that would give them an opportunity to sample that and decide, gee, is this something I enjoy doing? And if so, what would my plan be for growing that interest that I had? So that's one of the things that I absolutely loved about the work that I did. And by the way, those students I still stay in touch with. They are
Yeah.
now, they're grandparents now. And I talked to them. In fact, I was just on texting with one of them today who was looking at doing some volunteer work and said, how do I handle this situation? And of course, with my background, I said, really easy. This is what you say. And she said, that's so easy. It's easy for me because I have all those years of experience to draw from. And I think that's the other thing for people to realize: the older you get, the more experiences you have to draw from. So it's like your file cabinet that when someone presents you with a problem, oh, let me just go into that file cabinet and get that information out for you as to how you would deal with that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Today, there is so much of remote work, which is in some cases encouraged, in some cases not. And there is also a gig economy jobs that are now available. So, what new career strategies do you think people need to consider?
I think it's staying abreast of what is current. In fact, I was just looking online and they were talking about the 10 top skills that people should have. And I was a little surprised at the top one, but then again, not surprised because we're starting to use it as much as we do just sitting in front of a computer,
So,
which is
what
AI knowledge.
AI knowledge? Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're definitely moving into an age where, again, it's a tool. And I say to people, you have to understand it's a tool, it's not a replacement. So years from now, there will probably still be things that AI cannot do that only humans can. And frankly, it makes my work a lot easier because I can just feed it in information and what it gives me back in seconds, it may have taken me hours to do on my own. So I think that is something that people need to be aware of is how do you use AI in your daily life, just like you do a computer. And so gig economies, yes, I think that we're moving into that whole era, although it is not new. It actually, that model comes from the Middle Ages when people would come into towns, especially let's say they were building a cathedral, and that was pretty common. And stonemasons would come in, and carpenters would come in, and they would do their piece of the work. And then when they were finished, they would move on to the next town. So that was basically the start of a gig economy. And so what we have to do then is to say, what is it that I can do to market myself? What are my transferable skills? So I know that for mine, a lot of what I do today as a career coach and counselor very much was dependent on the skills that I had developed as a teacher. And it was doing presentations. And people said, how can you do a presentation that ends in exactly 1 hour? I said, because that's when the bell rang and they were off to the next class. So there had to be an ending to that lesson. I couldn't leave them hanging.
Yeah.
So I thought that helped me. Okay, organization, public speaking, writing, all of those were part of the work that I did. So I think it's very important for people to just start right now. Make a list of all of your transferable skills that you can take into that next position that will help you when you apply and when you interview for it.
That makes sense. You've,
And then,
yeah, sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
just very quickly, there's another thing that people don't do is they don't keep a log of their accomplishments. So, what were my successes in the work that I did? And I have done workshops, I work with clients individually on a model called a PSR. You start out with here's the problem that I was facing at work, here was the solution I applied, and as a result of that, here was the outcome. And so you can use that information in tailoring your resume and also use it during an interview when they ask you, tell me about a time.
Yeah. I was going to ask you about journalism because I noticed that one of your books actually focuses on journalism for inspiration and transformation. So, how can maybe you've answered it somehow and somewhat, how it helps people get clarity with their career goals?
That particular book is exactly what you said. It's for inspiration and transformation. And it was based upon a suggestion that someone made to me back in 2010, who said, if you want to consider writing as a talent that you want to develop, you might want to work on creating these blogs. And I started that. And so 15 years later, I'm still publishing them on a daily basis. And then I took that information and compiled it into the book. And so I think that is always a great way to start your day is reading one of those paragraphs, because that's all they are, about 200 words, and they always end with a question for you to answer. Some of it might have to do with how are you using your passion in the work that you do today. And I think that's important for people to look at. The other thing is in the books that I've written, The first one is really based upon my background as a teacher. So it has a contextual piece to it, and then there's an exercise that goes along with it. And so there's probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 different sections, each with an exercise that goes with it. Or if you're wanting to do a fast track on it, you can just buy the workbook. And the workbook will reference the pages in the other book. And at the same time, it's a slightly different version of how someone can take themselves through that process of finding what's important to you. It starts out with self-confidence, which I find is one of the deal breakers for a lot of people, Payal, when they lose their jobs. They lose their confidence. And so it's not by accident that the first chapter on self-confidence is the largest. And just identifying, what are my strengths? What am I good at? How do I know that I'm good at that? Who could I ask in my circle of acquaintances and friends about their feedback as to what they see in me as my strengths? So you don't do this in isolation at all.
Yeah, yeah. You don't do it in isolation. That's true. So, David, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self, what would that advice be?
Oh boy, this one comes up for me quite a bit because that's really about soul searching, Payal, in terms of, oh, if I could do things differently. I think it goes back to the story I was telling you about my interest in making things, building things with my hands. I think if I was to go back, I would have said to myself, pursue this. Find a way that you can develop your interests and skills in this area. And as I said, I didn't have that. I remember being in elementary school and they just didn't have those opportunities. The only one they had was when I was in seventh and eighth grade, we would have industrial arts. And because I went to a Catholic school, we had to go to the local public school to take that class. And I think that it was the idea of, and this seems to be my story, you come into one of these situations, and rather than it being a teaching moment, that teacher says, you already know how to do this, so just go ahead and do it. So if it was building something, constructing something out of wood, okay, here's the wood, go ahead and make it. As opposed to someone doing something as simple as, how do you correctly hammer a nail? Okay, there is a technique to that. How do you know to line things up so that they fit properly? None of that was ever taught. And I found that to be the case so much in education. They made an assumption that you already entered an activity with those skills developed, and that was not the case. So I think I would have wanted to have had individuals who could actually have taught me how to do those kinds of tasks. And then, like I said, maybe today I would be an electrical engineer or an architect. Not that I don't love what I do,
Yeah,
it definitely would have been a very different path for me.
that's interesting. It's always, I believe that there's always a fork at every juncture in your life, and then it's the path that you choose that leads to the next one and the next one and the next one. So, yeah. But I think where you are today, David, is also must feel so fulfilling because you have, through your knowledge and your experience, you have helped so many different people, give them clarity of, and give them direction if they're confused and they don't know, and they don't, one is not to have the confidence to be able to do it, and two is to be confused. And I think the fact that you're able to help them take their life forward, or they take their career path forward in through the way you talk to them or counsel them or teach them, I think is phenomenal, and I think very must be very fulfilling for you.
It really is because I was just again had a client I was talking to Friday, and he was a referral from another client that I had worked with. And in working with that other client, we came up with, I think that from what you've told me, you might want to think about relocating to Japan for a while from the States. And in talking to the latest client, he said, oh, yeah, I've been in touch with him, and he loves being in Japan and learning Japanese. And there you go. That was perfect for him. My job, Payal, is not to judge people's choices, their decisions. Mine is, how can I support you?
Yeah.
And in that support, you may find that's not something that you're interested in any longer, and that's fine. You believe me, I've tried a number of things and said, no, this is not something that I would want to do permanently, but at least I tried it.
Yeah.
That's another suggestion to people. Be willing to try things. So you may not always like them or be successful, but at least you can say, like you said, there was that fork. I tried to go down that path. It didn't really take me very far. So it was really about pursuing the other one.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think you've said it very correctly that you have to try. There are things that in my experience, I have done exactly that. I've never hesitated to try to do something and that, or have a different experience that I may know nothing about, but it's a learning. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, again, to your point, you tried. And I think that's the most important thing. So, yeah, keep your mind open and never hesitate to try and experiment with something that eventually may work and may be a success or may not work. And you may think, okay, no, this is something that I tried, but I'm not really keen on pursuing it, which is okay. So yeah, I completely understand where you're coming from. David, where can the listeners and the viewers find your books and also learn more about your work?
So my books are available on Amazon. And I just shifted my first book, which is Out of Work, Not Out of Worth, Navigating the Emotional Side of Job Loss. I just have transferred that to where you can also buy it on Ingram Spark. Okay, so that's another publisher. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the workbook. So all three of the books are currently available on Amazon. And so you simply go there and you look up my name and you'll find the three books for sale. And the other thing is I have a website, which is really very informational. I just redid that a few months ago, and that's at davidpetrovaycoaching.com. And on that website, it's a lot about my background and ways in which we could work together. And I also have a number of web podcasts that I've already done, and they're posted on there. Plus, some of my workshops are posted on there for people to look at and hopefully gain something from. And hopefully, once we get all this taken care of, yours will be posted also. And
Thank
they will not only see me, but they will see you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to you, David, and I do apologize that it's not the day for you and you're probably winding down now, but I it's been a pleasure. And as you rightly said, what this medium is just so special because you connect with people from different parts of the world, different time zones, and it just works. And then we have fulfilling conversations which create an impact. And I think that's my passion, is to be able to create an impact. So thank you once again. And I really appreciate this conversation.
Likewise. And again, your title for your podcast is perfect because the world is a melting pot.